Hello and welcome. I'm Sima Katauka and you're watching War Report on NewsX World. Let's take a look at the top headlines of this hour. According to the U.S. Department of Homeland Security, U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement agents have shot a man during an operation in Maryland, after the driver of a van allegedly rammed federal vehicles and drove towards officers, prompting agents to open fire yesterday, as local police now are investigating this incident. Mogadishu's residents will be voting in municipal elections today, marking Somalia's first direct ballot in the capital since 1969 and a crucial test ahead of expected national elections in 2026, as this is seen as a key step towards restoring full democratic participation despite ongoing Al-Shabaab attacks. A planned Christmas Eve jazz concert at the Kennedy Center was cancelled after the board voted to rename the landmark Donald J. Trump and the John F. Kennedy Memorial Center for the Performing Arts. According to local media, the musician Chuck Red, who has hosted the annual Jazz Jam since 2006, said he cancelled the event after seeing the name change. Torrential rains unleashed widespread flash flooding and mud flows across Southern California. Fire Department spokesperson Christopher Prater has said that in the east of Los Angeles, emergency crews spent much of the day answering dozens of rescue calls and pulling drivers to safety. The White House has ordered U.S. military forces to focus almost exclusively on enforcing a quarantine of Venezuelan oil for at least the next 2 months. U.S. officials says military options still exist, but focus is on economic pressure, while Venezuela says U.S. government is the threat, not Venezuela. Syria's Interior Ministry said the internal security forces working with the General Intelligence Directorate and international coalition forces arrested the ISIS leader in Damascus and several aides during a coordinated raid on a hideout in Madamiyah in the Damascus's countryside. Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan has offered his condolences after a jet crashed into Turkey, killing Libya's military chief and other senior officers. Turkey's interior minister said search teams have recovered a cockpit, voice and flight data recorders from the jet, while efforts to retrieve the victims' remains are still underway. 14 countries, including Britain, Canada, and Germany, have condemned the Israeli Security Cabinet's approval of 19 new settlements in the occupied West Bank, saying they violate international law and risk fueling instability. Now we start with the Vatican. The Vatican is filled with anticipation as the faithful gathered at St. Peter's Square for Pope Leo's first Christmas Eve Mass since his election earlier this year, marking his first Christmas as leader of the Roman Catholic Church. In a heartfelt message, the Pope expressed gratitude to those gathered at the Basilica of St. Peter's, acknowledged the challenges of the weather and the limited space. Let's listen in.
Buonasera, benvenuti tutti. Bienvenidos, welcome. Basilica of St. Peter's is very large, but unfortunately, it is not large enough to receive all of you. I admire and respect and thank you for your courage and your wanting to be here this evening. Tante grazie per venire qui questa sera anche in questo clima. Vogliamo celebrare insieme la festa di Natale. Gesù Cristo che è nato per noi ci porta la pace, ci porta l'amore di Dio. Tanti auguri a tutti voi. Seguite la celebrazione negli schermi. Dio vi protegga e benedica tutte le vostre famiglie. Nel nome del Padre e del Figlio e dello Spirito Santo. Amen.
Meanwhile, during the Christmas Eve sermon, Pope Leo urged the Christians to reflect on the story of Jesus' birth in a stable, emphasizing that refusing to help the poor and strangers today is akin to rejecting God. In his first Christmas as Pope Leo, the first U.S. Pope criticized the treatment of immigrants and echoed the world's Pope Benedict on the need to care for the vulnerable. Let's listen in.
Finché la notte dell'errore oscura questa provvidenziale verità, allora non c'è neppure spazio per gli altri, per i bambini, per i poveri, per gli stranieri. Così attuali le parole di Papa Benedetto XVI ci ricordano che sulla terra non c'è spazio per Dio se non c'è spazio per l'uomo. Non accogliere l'uno significa non accogliere l'altro. Invece là dove c'è posto per l'uomo, c'è posto per Dio. Allora una stalla può diventare più sacra di un tempio e il grembo della Vergine Maria è l'arca della nuova alleanza. Sì, mentre un'economia distorta induce a trattare gli uomini come merce, Dio si fa simile a noi, rivelando l'infinita dignità di ogni persona. Mentre l'uomo vuole diventare Dio per dominare sul prossimo, Dio vuole diventare uomo per liberarci da ogni schiavitù.
Now we move on to U.S. A U.S. naval cargo ship docked in Puerto Rico on Wednesday as Washington continues a major military build-up in the Caribbean. The vessel USNS Robert E. Peary arrived at the port of Ponce. The U.S. Navy lists the ship as a Lewis and Clark class dry cargo ship used to supply fuels, food, and equipment to naval forces. The docking comes amid a growing U.S. military presence in the region, which now includes an aircraft carrier, fighter jets, and multiple warships. U.S. officials say the buildup is part of increased pressure on the government of Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro. Recent actions have included the seizure of oil tankers near Venezuela and deadly strikes on boats Washington claims are involved in drug trafficking, though it has not publicly provided evidence. Now for this discussion, we welcome Ms. Irina Zuckerman. She's a senior journalist, joins us live from New York. Thank you very much, Ms. Zuckerman, for joining us again, and Merry Christmas to you. Now, looking at this, what is the significance of U.S. naval cargo ship being docked near Puerto Rico? Is this another move towards Venezuela?
Yes, absolutely. But it's not just Venezuela. That's part of the calculus. This is also part of the more general U.S. posture of securing the Western Hemisphere. Donald Trump, the president, made it very clear that he is essentially reviving the Monroe Doctrine and is looking to secure Latin America as U.S. sphere of influence. He is reviving the idea of spheres of influence and essentially posturing that foreign interference in the region is unwelcome, meaning Russia, China, and Iran. So this message is also strengthening the concept of U.S. strategic deterrence, not only aimed specifically at Venezuela, but more broadly at the networks operating in the region, including foreign powers, but also cartels, which have been designated as a terrorist organization, and even smaller countries that have been assisting Maduro, such as Cuba, which has reached out to the U.S. Recently to try to resolve the issues. U.S. is in general increasing its presence quite visibly in the area, especially the military presence, and it's also establishing and reaffirming its cooperation with some of the countries in the region, including Trinidad and Tobago and the Dominican Republic.
How do you think this latest move is further destabilizing the region and raising the tensions with U.S.?
Well, I wouldn't say that simply docking a ship is stabilizing the region. After all, it does not involve intervention in any country in the region, and Puerto Rico technically is part of the U.S. But it does send a signal that U.S. is paying attention, and it does put additional psychological pressure both on cartels and state actors operating in the region, including on the Maduro regime. I think the administration would be very happy if the regime ultimately collapsed. Simply sending signals and messages, however, is certainly not enough to change the regime, but it is enough to warn it off trying to smuggle drugs to the United States, or to continue, or from continuing its cooperation with cartels or other adversarial powers and terrorist organizations. In short, U.S. is trying to project strength. Of course, populist leaders inside all over Latin America will take it as an opportunity to try to whip up anti-American sentiment, but at the same time, it also sends reassurance to newly elected allies in the region, including just recently we've seen some crucial elections taking place in Chile, in Ecuador. The situation is changing on the ground. In Honduras, we've seen a conclusion of an election where President Trump actually intervened in more than just words. He pardoned the former president there. Of course, Argentina has been an ally since Milei took office. El Salvador as well is much more pro-American than many of the other countries. And of course, even in countries like Bolivia, things are starting to change course. So at the same time, yes, some of the countries that are already anti-American will certainly interpret it as a signal against them. But it also has a positive domino effect in strengthening relations with allies.
Thank you for highlighting and laying it all out for us. Ms. Zuckerman, please stay with us as we come back to you for our next discussion as well. Now, moving on, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky has said that Kyiv is prepared to withdraw heavy military forces from parts of Donbas region it still controls if Russia agrees to carry out a mirrored pullback as part of a peace deal. Zelensky has outlined the proposal while discussing a draft 20-point peace plan developed with the United States. The plan includes the possible creation of demilitarized or free economic zones in eastern Ukraine, though he has stressed any troop withdrawals would require direct talks with U.S. President Donald Trump. He said that any final agreement would be put to a nationwide referendum in Ukraine. Zelensky has added that he's waiting for Moscow's response as both sides remain far apart on key issues. Russian President Vladimir Putin has said Moscow wants its hardline demands to form the basis of talks and expects Russian forces to keep advancing. The plan also calls for elections. After an agreement is signed, NATO-style security guarantees for Ukraine, EU membership at a future date, and reconstruction funding. Disagreements remain over territory and the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant, which is currently under Russian control. Now for this discussion, we welcome back Ms. Irina Zuckerman. She's a senior journalist, joins us live from New York. Thank you very much, Ms. Zuckerman, for staying with us. Now looking at this, why is President Zelensky suddenly in just maybe I've noticed it, but he's saying that he would withdraw heavy military forces from parts of Donbas. How likely is that that this move suggested by Zelensky will change the course of how military intervention is done by Russia?
I really do think that he said this knowing fully well that it's not going to work, that Russia is not going to take him up on his offer, and he's not really losing anything by signaling that he is ready to make concessions for peace, which Russia at no point has agreed to do. Quite frankly, what does he have to lose? At worst, he is going to agree to some temporary truce, and at a later point in time, this can be renegotiated. Most likely, that's not going to happen, and whoever is skeptical about Zelensky's willingness to make pragmatic sacrifices for the sake of saving lives, making peace, can be reassured that that's decidedly not the case, and it places the full burden of responsibility for the next steps on Russia. It puts the ball squarely in Russia's court. Russia, throughout this whole process, has continued attacking cities in Ukraine and killing civilians, and so far has not responded with any positive signals, even to this gesture which could be seen as a major breakthrough. All signs are pointing to the fact that while U.S. And Ukraine may very well be on the same page, Russia is not. And without the aggressor party in the conflict, there's no way to put an end to the hostilities unless Russia is physically driven out of Ukraine. So since Russia is not likely to agree to any form of continued practical acceptance of this suggestion, we can expect that on the battlefield things will continue as they are, even as the parties continue to engage in diplomatic discussions.
Thank you very much, Ms. Zuckerman. And further building on that, how aligned are U.S., Russia, and Ukraine from your analysis? How do you think they are aligned?
I think Ukraine and Russia are not aligned at all. I think Russia has absolutely no interest or intention in making peace or putting an end to its efforts to advance in any way. And I think it's trying to maneuver in such a way that as it causes the American leadership to support its advances rhetorically, such as a couple of days ago, Vice President J.D. Vance claimed that Ukraine is admitting it could lose, Donbass or particular cities. And sure, anything in theory could happen if you wait long enough, but quite frankly, no one has to wait for that to happen. Countries are able to direct situations towards a more desirable outcome, and all of this puts an onus to the U.S. to choose what it wants to happen. Does it want a prolonged conflict with an uncertain outcome? Does it want Russia to win and to establish a military contingency in the midst of Europe and to continue spreading havoc all over Europe as it has been doing? Or does it want Ukraine to win, to secure its borders, and to create a partnership with the West that will be both lucrative and stabilizing? I think the answer so far has not been reassuring for anybody. Judging from the steps taken by this administration, they have virtually given up any assistance to Ukraine. They are selling weapons to the Europeans at a premium, but nevertheless are actually discouraging Americans from even donating money voluntarily. We have seen some comments from recently.
And Ms. Zuckerman, building on that, you also mentioned that there is growing frustration and the fatigue between the supporters of Ukraine. So how do you foresee the frustration of President Trump in particular? Do you think that he's still motivated to broker peace between Russia and Ukraine?
I disagree. I don't think there's any fatigue between the real supporters of Ukraine. I think, if anything, European countries have been forced to step up to the plate to contribute much more significantly, especially now that the United States have completely walked back any voluntary commitments beyond the sale of weapons and maybe some logistical and intelligence assistance. In moreover, poll after poll inside the United States shows growing support for Ukraine. It has actually been very high even within the Republican circles, but it has grown significantly higher this year, including in Congress, and Congress has been stepping up its support for Ukraine. So the only fatigue we are talking about is the fatigue among the MAGA contingency, which is actually not all of the Republican Party, and it's not even all of the MAGA elements. It's only a particular group of isolationists and pro-Russian activists and political operatives who've been advancing this notion and trying to force it on everybody else. But as I said, poll after poll shows how people actually feel about the situation and where they're willing to put their their money and their political weight. So I think President Trump will find himself being pressured into trying to do more as the situation of Russia's increased aggression all over Europe continues. I think many in Congress are increasingly frustrated by the administration's position in that regard, and they're concerned about the long-term repercussions for the U.S. transatlantic relations, its own security, and its long-term political future beyond the Trump administration.
Thank you for laying it all out there for us, Ms. Zuckerman, and staying with us throughout our news. Thank you very much. Now we move on to our Asia. North Korean leader Kim Jong Un has visited a nuclear submarine factory and received a message from Russia's President Vladimir Putin, hailing the country's invincible friendship. North Korea and Russia have drawn closer since Moscow launched its campaign against Ukraine nearly 4 years ago, and Pyongyang has sent troops to fight and defend Russia. And in return, Russia is sending North Korea financial aid, military technology, and food, as well as energy supplies. According to the North Korean state media, President Putin has said in a message that the heroic efforts of North Korean soldiers in Russia's Kursk region clearly proved the invincible friendship. Between Moscow and Pyongyang, Putin has also noted that the provisions of the historic treaty the two leaders signed last year, which includes a mutual defense clause, that has been fulfilled. Now for this discussion, we welcome Dr. Sanjay Kumar. He's a journalist from the Korea Herald, joins us live from Seoul. Thank you very much, Dr. Sanjay, for joining us again. Good to see you. Now looking at this, how does Kim Jong-un's visit to this nuclear submarine facility, what do you think this signals, and do you think is there any change in their stance, or it's just accelerating?
Asuma, there is no change in their stance, but of course Kim and Putin, they are trying to kill two birds with one stone when it comes to strategic messaging. So on one side, they are trying to send a message to the West-led security, led by US as well as the Western players there. And at the same time, they are also trying to send a message to the regional actors in the East Asia, especially East Asia and Northeast Asia, and especially to countries like Japan and South Korea and US, where they are regional players and regional actors in real sense. So they are trying to kill two birds with one stone. I mean, they are trying to send two messages with a very common move. And the message that Putin has reiterated of this invincible friendship or brotherhood, whatever you call, this is not new. As you know, like last year, they have signed the defense agreement, and they are trying to implement it through various means. And one thing is very clear here, that my enemy, the enemy of my enemy is my friend. This kind of geopolitical narrative is once again being established, and that is why we should not take it as a surprise. Yeah.
Yes, thank you for highlighting that. And Dr. Sanjay, what does this deployment of North Korean troops, the continued deployment reveals about Pyongyang's evolving approach to alliance and politics, also regime security with its international allies like Russia?
See, if you see from North Korea's calculus,
yes,
then for them this troop deployment is not just deployment of troops, but it has to do with the diplomatic recognition, the military cooperation in long run, and the economic benefits that they need really in large. I mean, they need huge economic aid from countries such as Russia, because from China, you could see that in last 10 years they had not been getting the support that they were looking for, and that is why Russia is their new friend, and this kind of calculus, it is going to serve their interest, the North Korean interests, and that is why Pyongyang doesn't want to miss any opportunity, and their diplomatic recognition has been established. You can see from the statements of the President Trump in recent few months that his tone is a little softened and he wants to interact with Kim. So these kind of diplomatic recognitions are also being brought on the table through these kind of you can say that military maneuvering or kind of using the military as a service. And in a way, from a long-term perspective, for North Koreans, it is also acting as a deterrence when it comes to relationship with Russia or enhancing the military ties, and it is serving their interest in a simple way we can understand.
Dr. Sanjay, can you tell us briefly just a little bit about why China has been, China is not as supportive of Pyongyang as North Korea was expecting or wanted?
Yes. Asuma, if you see the last 10, 12 years, China focus was on economy rather than military. Of course, some issues such as Taiwan is of great importance to them. Hong Kong also already had been, their ambitions already had been upheld. So that is why, if you see, their economic focus was not in terms of North Korea, and they did not want to offend countries such as South Korea. They want to take South Korea along with them, and they didn't want to bring North Korea into the dialogue while dealing with dealing with US, Korea, and some like-minded countries. But the recent, in the last 2-3 years, if you see, after this Russia-Ukraine war and the North Korean growing alignment with Russia, this has made China to take interest. Otherwise, they were not very interested in bringing North Korea into the dialogue always. Yeah, I mean, when I say dialogue, I'm trying to say that they didn't want to bring North Korea into picture while having their economic achievements and economic ambitions in place.
Thank you for highlighting that. And lastly, Dr. Sanjay, how might this Russia-North Korea Mutual Defense Treaty alter the strategic calculation of South Korea with US?
They are going, Russia and North Korea, they are going to put this relationship in place, and they are not going to give any opportunity to the other parties like West to come into this discussion, because Russia and North Korea, both the countries, they know very well that any further confrontation with US and Europe, will lead to a loss to them as well, and it is their a kind of adaptability politics, and in long run they want to just try to maintain and give a message to the world that see what we are doing to make this world multipolar, and trying to maintain this balance of power through realist perspective. So this is their long-term approach, and they are not going to make any mistake in coming months and years. And because they have to engage US, they want to talk to the US, because the entire West and the regional security in this Northeast Asia and East Asia somehow is led by US and passively by China. So this kind of approach would be there in coming months and years. This is my assessment.
Thank you for sharing that and laying it all out for us, Dr. Sanjay. And now we move on to our next news. NVIDIA has agreed to license chip technology from startup GROQ and hire away its CEO, a veteran of Alphabet's Google. The deal follows a familiar pattern in recent years, where the world's biggest technology firms pay large sums in deals with promising startups to take their technology and talent, but stop short of formally acquiring talent. Target GROQ is known as inference, where the artificial intelligence models that have already been trained to respond to requests from users, while NVIDIA dominates the market for AI training, AI models, as it faces much more competition in inference, where traditional rivals such as Advanced Micro Devices have aimed to challenge it, as well as startups such as GROQ and Cerebras Systems. Meanwhile, GROQ has said that NVIDIA has agreed to a non-exclusive license to GROQ's technology. GROQ has added that its founder, Jonathan Ross, who helped Google start its AI chip program, as well as GROQ president Sunny Madra and other members of its engineering team will join NVIDIA. That's all we have time for. Keep watching NewsX World for more news updates from around the world.